Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming wherever you are. I'm Nitsan Chorev. I'm a sociologist at Brown University. I'm also this year the president of SASE, and in that role, I was asked to have what we call featured panels. The theme of the conference this year was development or rethinking development, and there's a long way of maybe rethinking about it. So obviously in a socio-economics conference, it made a lot of sense to have a panel on just development and capitalism. And we are very, very fortunate to have four experts who are responsible or study different regions in the world to talk with us about development and capitalism. What I'm going to do is give you a few rules of conduct, given the fact that we are all new to this virtual universe. And then I'll introduce the speakers one by one. They will talk for 10 or 15 minutes. And then I really hope that we can have a relatively interpersonal conversation by people raising their virtual hand, because I don't see all of your faces here, and just ask questions. So again, thank you all for coming. I do want to tell you that we are recording this session. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can hide your face and maybe not ask questions later on. And we will not be posting it online without the permission of the speakers. So you speakers don't have to worry about it, but others, if you don't want to be recorded, just shut down your camera, turn it off. I think that's more or less the rules. I will introduce to the speakers as they go. We will talk in alphabetical order. And because you can use the chat function, but maybe not for asking substantive questions. For substantive questions, we'll wait until the end of the conversation. It's delightful to not see you, but I'm really happy that you are all here. So, okay, so let me start. I will start with Zophia Edwards, who is an assistant professor of sociology and director of Black Studies at Providence College in the United States. Zophia's research examines the impacts of colonialism and multiracial labor movements on long-term development in the Global South. She is also one of the organizers of a mini conference in SASE this year on decolonizing development. Thank you, Zophia, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nitsan, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I'm going to be talking about the racial in capitalism. About 1 month ago, deep in this COVID crisis, 116 farm workers left Jamaica for the United States under a seasonal work program. They were destined for Gebber's Farm in Washington, where they would be reaping apples. The Jamaican Minister of Labor and Social Security praised the program as an excellent example of the strength of the US-Jamaica bond and a lifeline for both the Jamaican workers and the national economy. The US ambassador to Jamaica said the program was a win-win for everyone, a powerful partnership. In an interview, one of the departing farmers told a journalist, the journalist asked, "How does your family feel about you leaving them at this time?" To which he responded, "If I stay in Jamaica, probably they wouldn't get a school book in September to go back to high school. So I talked to them and the risk factor is here, but I still have to take a chance." Hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, South Africans, and other people from colonized and formerly colonized places in the global periphery, both on temporary visas and undocumented, are spread out across North America and Europe. Long before COVID, they were forced to live in unsanitary, overcrowded, and unsafe conditions. These conditions exacerbate the spread of the virus, as advocates say. On top of this, workers are not being given PPE. In Canada, at least 600 migrant farm workers have contracted the virus since they arrived in Canada, and at least 2 have died, and both of them were Mexican. These brown and Black workers have now been deemed essential, and so they still have to report for work despite stay-at-home orders. Essential but expendable, as many of them don't get paid sick leave or have access to healthcare or health insurance. And those who are undocumented still face the threat of deportation. So the COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharp relief that the deep structural problems affecting racialized workers in the core and periphery are not just continuing, but getting more precarious. Yet many social scientific analyses of the global political economy, at least in the pre-COVID era, remain race neutral and willfully indifferent to the fact that global inequalities bear a distinct racial pattern. So how can we understand these ongoing dynamics of the super exploitation of people of color in the core and in the periphery? Understanding the forces of capitalism, I think, is not enough. We must see this as a system of racial capitalism. So in this brief 10 minutes, I just want to explain the concept of racial capitalism, how it helps us to understand the global political economy, and therefore why it's crucial that we adopt this framework for our social scientific analyses. And I'll do this with reference to our current global human and economic crisis of COVID-19. So although very much still on the margins, we have seen a recent surge in the use of the term racial capitalism in the social sciences. The term was made popular through Cedric Robinson's seminal work, Black Marxism, published in 1983. But this overarching framework of racial capitalism dates far back to the early 20th century Black radical thinkers, such as Esther Cooper Jackson and W.E.B. Du Bois. Racial capitalism refers to the mutually constitutive entanglements of racialized exploitation and capital accumulation. According to this framework, capitalism as we know it today would not have been possible if not for imperialism, colonialism, racial slavery, expropriation, and super exploitation. Capital accumulation would not be possible today if not for these ongoing dynamics. So these theories of racial capitalism maintain that capital and capitalist states secure profit maximization not by rendering labor abstract, as Marx theorized, but by tying profits to what Lisa Lowe called the social production of difference, including race, gender, and nationality. But Blackness in particular was and remains, and I'll quote Cherise Burden-Stelly here, a capacious category of surplus value extraction essential to an array of political economic functions, including accumulation, disaccumulation, debt, planned obsolescence, and absorption of the burdens of economic crises. Marxist feminists like Claudia Jones adds that Black women face a triple oppression in the racial capitalist system along the axes of race, class, and gender. Through a racial capitalism framework, we can analyze both how capital accumulation depends on this racialized exploitation and who is most negatively impacted. So how does racial capitalism help us to understand the global political economy in the time of COVID? COVID has exacerbated the already existing racial inequalities that undergird the economy. Capital and states have deemed Black and brown labor essential to maintaining profits. Core countries are calling upon Black and brown people, both within their countries and in the global periphery, to ensure continued production and profits in every realm, from food production to the service sector to sports entertainment. At the same time, it is these very people, particularly African and African descended populations, already living under the weight of centuries of white supremacy and structural racism in the core and in the diaspora from the US to Brazil, who are disproportionately dying from the disease. Racial capitalism highlights on whose backs wealth continues to be generated during this pandemic and surely after. Racial capitalism helps us to understand state responses, especially in the core, which have been to preserve the system and protect the interests of capital. Relief and welfare programs in the US and the UK, for example, have not targeted the most vulnerable. More than that, they've deliberately sought to exclude Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. In Germany, the country so praised for its COVID response, undocumented Black and Brown immigrants cannot access COVID-19 health and social welfare provisions, such as free testing. Wealthier imperial countries continue to extract more undervalued labor from the periphery and formerly colonized countries. And those countries already are constrained by relations of dependency and are now in an even more precarious position. And all across the world, states are busy planning for ways to go back to an economic organization based on neoliberal ideologies that guarantee capital accumulation rather than envisioning a different way forward. Racial capitalism also helps to explain why in this moment we are not seeing white workers joining forces in mass with Black, Indigenous, and other workers of color. Du Bois shows us that it has not just been about material interests for white workers. In this racial capitalist system where white supremacist ideology prevails, they also seek to maintain their public and psychological wages of whiteness. That is, their higher social status and sense of superiority just simply from being categorized as not Black. Thus, racial capitalism has been and is being, and I'll quote Du Bois, adopted, forwarded, and approved by white labor, unquote. They did this with Brexit and with the election of Donald Trump. And quoting Du Bois again, this has resulted in the subordination of colored labor to white profits the world over. That the white working class has sought candidates and agenda who vow to reassert their racial dominance means that we must consider how racial capitalism and not just capitalism shapes exploitation and solidarities. So why is it important to conceptualize capitalism and racial capitalism in the sense that what is at stake? I would argue that we're seeing that it's people's lives, both during this crisis and after it passes. People are suffering, but not all people are suffering equally. Racial capitalism is therefore a theoretical and analytical framework that increases our explanatory power and increases our predictive power. Because the current conditions are not surprising to the few social scientists who use racial capitalist approaches to their study of the global political economy. In addition, using this framework means then that our interventions could be more effective, since the pandemic is not affecting all those who encompass the entire working class equally. Brown and Black workers in the core and periphery are being more negatively exploited and more negatively impacted. And so therefore that fact would improve our response, should improve our response if we want to save lives. So I would just end by challenging us as social scientists to take up that mantle, because if we do not, we can all lose. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this. And we will continue with Keun, who is a professor of economics at Seoul National University. Among many other titles, he is a council member of the World Economic Forum and a lifetime fellow of the Korea Academy of Science and Technology. Last year, he published The Art of Economic Catch-up, Barriers, Detours, and Leapfrogging with Cambridge University Press. The floor is yours.
Thank you. We just heard about somewhat darker side of capitalism. So let me turn to a little bit brighter side of capitalism. We might talk about how to achieve economic catching up. Okay. So my talk will be based on my recent book. Okay. So what do I mean by catching up or catching up development? Simply, it means closing the gap between your latecomers and incumbent who are most in advanced economies. And this word catching up came from very famous article written by Abramovich. He wrote the article Catching Up, Forging Ahead, and Falling Behind. So this article was about how European economies are doing each other after World War II. We are taking this framework to context of emerging countries, how they are doing each other. So we can measure catch-up by per capita income of countries, or if we can talk about catch-up of firm level, if you talk about their market share, sales growth, and so on. So it's basically about rise and decline of nations and firms. Okay? So my key message is that I guess many of you know Ha-Jun Chang, he talked about kicking away the ladder. My message from this book is that even if the ladder is kicked away, we can still catch up by taking detours or trying leapfrogging. So here detour means that building capabilities, and leapfrog means like doing something different or ahead of incumbent and taking advantage of exogenous windows of opportunity. So I explain this message in next 10 minutes. First, one thing we can say is that I can talk about Zenon's paradox. Zenon is sophist who lived in ancient Greece. He talked that Achilles at the time best marathon will not be able to catch up with the turtle if turtle started the line about 1 mile ahead of him, because if Achilles reached this point of a turtle's starting point, turtle would have made some more advances. If this guy reached this point, then turtle would have made some more advances. So if you keep this process, he'll never be able to take over turtle. So this is catch-up paradox. In other words, you cannot catch up if you just keep catching up. That means you have to do leap over the incumbent. We have to do something different route, different path. That's the key message of my book, or using the concept of leapfrogging. So one of the basic starting points is that concept middle-income trap. And that means if your income level stay between 20 to 40% of US income level for several decades, that's case of middle income trap. Many countries in this trap situation. This is the World Bank definition, but there are few exceptions like Korea or Taiwan and so on, who are successfully catching up from less than 20% income level US, but now reach 70%, which is same as Japan. Okay, so our discussion how to achieve this catch up and how some countries are not doing that, or they're stuck in the middle income trap. Okay? So for example, Mexico used to be close to 40% US level, but now keep declining, reaching around 30%, despite NAFTA or free trade. Okay, so NAFTA didn't help Mexico to go beyond middle income trap. Okay. China is now elected 30% US level, which is the central point of the box between 20 to 40%. So the issue whether China will be like Korea or China will be like Mexico, Brazil, some stagnation. So that's the key issue facing China. But I'm kind of optimistic about China. I'll also mention that during my talk. Okay. So one of the key issues of solving middle-income is how to build up your innovation capabilities, which can be measured by simply R&D GDP ratios. Usually 1% is ratio become high-income countries. Okay, but if you see this range, this flat in middle-income ranges, it means many middle-income countries are not paying enough to innovation, whereas China, Korea is outlier compared to its peer group. So this indicating the innovation is one of the key issues to solve middle-income trap. That I proved in my previous article doing some econometrics showing that growth beyond upper middle income, high income, innovation and high education is key variables. Whereas growth in middle income, low middle income, institution and basic human capital are key factors. But in that article, I use only simple patent or R&D GDP ratio innovation measures. But I can do more aspect innovation using the concept of national innovation system. That's a key concept in Schumpeterian economics. Okay, so the analysis is the mechanism about how to build, create new knowledge and how to diffuse them. So Schumpeterian idea is that if you better analyze, your performance will be better in innovation, also in economic growth. Okay, so that's I did in my previous book. Okay, so the why we take detours before leapfrogging is that we face many barriers. For example, we're having difficulty in building firm level capabilities, and we don't have a big business. We usually have only SMEs. That's not enough to grow beyond middle income. And we are facing IPR barriers, intellectual property right. That's a serious barrier to catch up by South. Okay, so given these barriers, that's why I'm asking, we have to take, for example, this is IPR barrier. US IT is filing more and more litigation against IPR issues from the export from South rather than anti-dumping. Okay. So many companies from South, like Korea, China, all have difficulty in IPR issues. And Huawei is the example. Huawei faces many IPR litigations. Okay. So that's why suggesting 3 detours. First, imitation to innovation. Second, join GBC, but build a more domestic value chain. That means less GBC, eventually more GBC again. And lastly, you can specialize in short cycle technology, but eventually turning to long cycle technology-based sector. These are 3 detours I'm proposing in my book. Okay? So first detour means that in terms of IPR, just providing strong IPR does not guarantee you innovation because without capability, nothing happens. So to promote first capability, you provide weak IPR or try putty patent rather than regular patent. That was German innovation against UK, who are the incumbent. So German used the putty patent to recognize minor innovation. Okay. And second detour is you got to join GVC, global value chain, to learn from advanced countries, introducing new knowledges. But if you keep doing that, you don't get the high chance of further catching up because you have to create eventually domestic value chain. Okay. After you build domestic value chain, you got to join GVC again. This is non-linear pattern. So more GVC, less GVC, then more GVC again. Okay. This is different from the idea that always more GVC is better. For example, this is measurement of GVC participation. Here, GVC means that if you it's measured by share of foreign value added in export. So when you export, how much is from foreign value added or how much from domestic value added? So Korea joined GVC, increased GVC, but this time we are catching up very fast. This keep decline. That means Korea created more domestic value chain. It placed formerly imported intermediate part. But now Korea joined OECD, then more GVC again. Then this non-linear pattern. In, out, in, again. And this happening again in China recently. From the 2000, China decreasing GVC participation because China increasing domestic value added. So this is non-linear pattern is very one of the detours. More GVC, less GVC, then more GVC again. Lastly, this happening to sectoral pattern too. Lastly, another GVC is another detour is that you got to join specialize in IT, which is very short cycle technology based sectors. Okay, because if you go long cycle sectors such as a machine tool or material, it's high entry barrier because knowledge is very stable, whereas in short cycle knowledge is changing very quickly. So incumbent knowledge becomes quickly obsolete over time. That means less entry barrier for latecomers to join. It's a niche for latecomers. Okay. So we can measure that by patent citation. So here 10 means if you cite 10-year-old patent, that's the average cycle time. You can measure it. This is Korea Taiwan getting short and short. That means they are getting into more risk technology-based sectors such as IT. Whereas incumbent strong in long cycle technology, such as Germany, Sweden, they are strong in machine tool, and so on, all the long cycle technology, which is very good, very strong, high entry barriers, but they're very difficult to enter by latecomers. So first you join GBC, try to specialize in short cycle, only later you turn to long cycle. This is what I mean by detour, from short to long cycle detours. And this is the top 10 patent classes where largest number of patents filed by European G5 and Korea, Taiwan. No overlaps. Europe has more patents in drugs, material, which are all long cycle. But Korea, Taiwan has more patents in semiconductor, television, connector. They're all short cycle. So no overlaps means that they come trying to find their niche in short cycle technologies. Okay. And this happening to China too. China getting into short and short cycle technology based sector such as IT, which is same pattern as in past of Korea and Taiwan. But Korea now trying to get into long cycle, which is medicine or basic science or pharmaceutical. So Korea turning to from short to long cycle. So this is where I'm by detour from short to long. Okay, this is a hallmark of other countries. Korea trying getting into these long cycle sectors. Okay? And Samsung is getting into that sector too. Okay. Then last stage is try leapfrogging, which means that latecomers doing something ahead of foreigners, thereby leap over incumbent. Okay. What's good about leapfrogging? Because this is one way to overcome IPR barriers, because you are doing something ahead of latecomers, ahead of incumbent. Okay. So and you avoid direct competition with incumbent by entering new market ahead of incumbent. But this is a more challenging stage. It's not easy. It's a main risk for trying leapfrogging. Okay. So for example, when Korea entered making mobile phone, there are three choices: either follow Motorola or benchmark Nokia, which is at the front level technology. But Korea choose neither Motorola, Nokia, but jump to CDMA, which is emerging technology by Qualcomm. So Korea skipped these two generations, but jump to emerging technology, which is what I call leapfrogging. Okay. So leapfrogging is the flying on a balloon when ladder is kicked away. So you don't need ladder because you are flying on a balloon, which is doing something ahead of incumbent by jumping into new technology, which is like digital technology, whereas Japan used to lock in analog technology. That's why Korea catching up rapidly against Japan in terms of moving into digital technology ahead of Japan. That's an example of how Samsung was catching up move over Sony. So now we are facing another paradigm shift. In other words, we are seeing new energy revolution, replacing fossil fuel, and we are facing now fourth industrial revolution. This is best time to try leapfrogging because leapfrogging has best success for chance because when you try shifting period, when there is emerges new paradigm, that's best time to try leapfrogging. We're happening many countries like BRICS, many cases of leapfrogging in China, Brazil, even Africa, working up trying GM cotton, which is leapfrogging. We have case of Encopa, M-Pesa, there's Kenya. These are all example leapfrogging. Okay, so eventually we can talk about this Kuznets curve. In other words, this every income level, this damage to environment. This passed by gone by foreigners, huge damage to environment. So latecomers, we can skip C by jumping to B to D by adopting more environmentally friendly technology. So this is another leapfrogging to more environmentally friendly technology. Okay, so this case of Encopa in Kenya. So leapfrogging, they skipped kerosene-based lighting, jump to solar-based lighting by adopting this new technology. So these are the leapfrogging is happening many parts of the world, and which is one way to quickly bracing possibility from new innovations. So this is my last chart. So overall, my theory is that given several failures and barriers, we can try detours, 3 detours: imitation to innovation, short to long cycle, domestic value chain first, then later global value chain. Okay, then we can after build up capability based on the tool, we can try leapfrogging, which is flying on a balloon when lead is kicked away. That end up three key messages, three catch-up paradoxes. In other words, to be similar, you got to be different. That means you should try something different. Detour can be faster than straight road. If you go straight road, there are traffic jam. But if you take detours, which means innovation, it's risk-taking, but it can be eventually a fast way to reach your destination. But you can fly out of a windows opportunity, but you can fall through windows if you don't have a strong wing, which means innovation capability. So that means leapfrogging involves risk. Okay, so I think that's it. This is the ideas of flying on a balloon when lead is kicked away. Okay, thank you. That's it. Okay.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Aldo Madariaga, who is an assistant professor at the Center for Economics and Social Policy at the Universidad Mayor in Chile. Very recently, he published a book called Neoliberal Resilience, Lessons in Democracy and Development from Latin America and Eastern Europe with Princeton University Press. Aldo, the stage is yours.
So thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen. I also have my PowerPoint here. Okay. Thank you very much, Nitsan, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here, even if only virtually. It's always good to be in SASE. What I'm going to talk about here is I'm going to touch a little bit upon my book, and I'm going to do a reflection on how development, capitalism, and democracy connect. And I have more questions and reflections than answers, as Keun had. So I'm gonna add to the debate by just posing a lot of questions. First thing is, I think we really have to question what is development. I don't think this is a rhetorical question, especially right now. And there are several dilemmas for thinking about this, and I show you a few. So we have the concept of development, which has a long pedigree in the social sciences, in multilateral organizations, taking them different meanings, different ways of measuring them, and even transforming them in public policy interventions globally. We have goals, we have development goals, and different generations of development goals even, right? And on the other spectrum, we have how people feel about how they should live and how they should improve their lives. So here in South America, we have a increasingly more popular concept is buen vivir, a good living. So several indigenous peoples have this philosophy that good living means a community-centered, ecologically balanced, and culturally sensitive way of living, and is made of their own cultures and self-discovery, as opposed to these grand narratives coming from top down. But at the same time, I remember a very good friend doing ethnography in southern Mexico, for example, telling me with great pain that the culture of some of these villages she visited was very much against empowerment of women, implied that women had to be aside from the public space and public deliberation, for example. That was the culture of how they understood their way of living, their well-being, in a way. So I think we have to question what is development in a world of multiculturalism and increasing recognition of indigenous knowledge, indigenous cultures, but at the same time having this idea of a certain standard, a certain minimums of what development is. So this is one thing. Second thing is economic development and its relation with inequality. So a general understanding is that development is about well-being or improving the quality of life, improving well-being. So it has to do with the level, so it's improving the levels of well-being, of quality of life. But at the same time, there's the other side of this, which is how homogeneous are these levels in a given society. And there's a whole question about how you measure these levels. And I'm not going to go into details about this, but this is very problematic. How you think of, there's in Eastern Europe and Latin America, there are high-income societies right now, high-income countries, and would you call them developed? This is highly problematic. But even more problematic from my perspective is how growing income and wealth inequality are going hand in hand with high economic development today. So you have high levels of development, but at the same time very heterogeneous and growing heterogeneity within those levels. And a few years ago, Branko Milanovic published this book on global inequality, and we all know the elephant curve, right? So the elephant curve had a negative and a positive side. The negative side was the trunk of the elephant going up, which was the 5 to 1% of global population going increasingly rich. But then there was a positive side, which was the back of the elephant, which was also high. And that meant that around the 50th percentile of population in the world, which was basically the middle class of countries like China and India, also growing rapidly in terms of their income share. So that was the positive side. But recent measures of this, with the recent data, shows that the elephant has become a luck monster, which means that the back of the elephant has flattened, and now we have sort of a flat back and then a very high peak in what was the trunk of the elephant. Now is the sort of the neck and the head of the luck monster. So basically, it's just the 5 and 1% of the richest population in the world gaining from this economic development. So what is development in this world of growing wealth and income inequality? And last but not least, what is development in this world of climate change and economic disaster? So if development is about ever-growing levels, of economic growth, even if it's green, so how do we reconcile this with what's happening in terms of climate change? But even in taking into consideration the pandemic and the relation between humans and other species, right, which has caused so many pains and diseases. So what is development in this context? I'm going to talk about now about development under capitalism. And development under capitalism, capitalism has a constant drive for capital accumulation and expansion of profit making, right? And in this context, it's only in this context that you can understand this surge in inequality, environmental degradation as being congruent with development. So we should keep this in mind, that when we're talking about development, it's a capitalist development, and what are the preconditions of this, or the structural determinants of this. But capitalism sometimes and very frequently goes together with democracy today. And understanding capitalist development together with democracy means that this type of development happens in certain specific scenario. And what is that scenario? I believe that we can think of development under democratic capitalism means that this capital accumulation and profit making is constantly being constrained by electoral politics, by a new source. This is a new source of power, electoral politics and popular will, right? So the question is, up to what extent do capitalists accept, agree, or withstand this democratic corset? And for people like Polanyi, this was the bottom line. Otherwise, capitalism would destroy itself, right? But we had this type of corset under, what we can call social democratic capitalism or embedded liberalism in the past. But now this corset is opening up under what we can call neoliberal democratic capitalism. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. I just want to show you, and I'm going to go a bit quicker here, that when we think about democracy and capitalism, these are also problematic terms that don't always go hand in hand. And of course, there are several works in the literature that spoke about the relationship, the complementary relationship between capitalist development and political development, let's say, or democratic development. But this is not the case, I think, always. And there are important examples in the past in Latin America, even today, during the period of the commodity boom that we just experienced, with increasing income per capita, decreasing inequality, but also decreasing democratic quality in many of these countries. But even today, if you think about this process, for example, of automatization, robotics, and skill-biased technological change, which is clearly capitalist development, and you know, as we can think about it, but this brings effects on employment and inequality that are being determined for right-wing populism, which erodes democracy. So capitalist development and democracy don't always go hand in hand, and sometimes they clash between each other. Of course, today, even the most basic steps in this ladder of growing economic and political development are put into question when we think about civil rights, even in the most advanced democracies in the world. Let's talk a little bit about neoliberalism and development, which is what I develop in my book. You can email me, and I will give you a discount flyer if you want, if you think this is relevant for your own research. So what I found there is that the relationship between capitalism and democracy under this neoliberal form of capitalism implied or necessitated the reduction of the, let's say, the reduction of democracy to its competitive component. This is eliminating representation. So basically, democracies become free and fair elections, but the dimension of representation and popular vote are reduced. And this is done through different mechanisms. For example, creating support and unleashing the power of business through different means. For example, through privatization and through targeting privatization to certain business groups and to certain specific capitalists. Through blocking opposition from the left, using electoral institutions and veto powers, through blocking the power resources of labor, and through isolating key economic policies from political deliberation. And I'm thinking about independent central banks and fiscal policy rules that are even put into the very constitution so that elected governments cannot touch them, right? So several authors say that in this scenario, we no longer have democratic capitalism anymore, but this is a form of post-democracy or even an authoritarian neoliberalism. Final slide. What is the future for capitalist development and democracy under these conditions? And I'm not going to wrap up. I'm going to raise further questions, basically. I think that this scenario of neoliberal resilience and using these mechanisms that I just talked about will continue to drive development for a while. This means that in order to getting rid from the corset of electoral politics, from the corset of democracy, and especially in this scenario of reduced economic growth, I think there will be more and more appeals to reduce democracy, reduce the representative dimension of democracy in order to unleash the potential of capitalist development. Now, the COVID pandemic also presents a possible game changer, which is the uncertainty that it presents into the future and the falling of certain taboos, especially thinking of certain key economic policies that are being changed right now, or at least challenged. So the question is whether we will see a great divergence now because of the emergence of new and different conceptions of development and new ways of thinking about the compatibility of development and democracy. Whether business and the super rich will agree to a new compromise between capitalism and democracy. So we're seeing in the news in these days that the super rich are calling for a new tax on themselves for governments to improve their revenue. but not always, or not everywhere is this happening, and perhaps popular revolts and social movements will force capitalists to do that. This is what is happening right now in my country, in Chile, which was the poster child of neoliberalism for a long time, where neoliberalism basically continued over time by encroaching on democracy, where huge popular revolts and social movements are now questioning this, are now turning the tables around, but where the future, again, is very open. And even if a new democratic and new developmental alternative is certainly possible, there's also possible another alternative of police state, of increasing repression, increasing authoritarianism, and even higher neoliberal stakes. So I think this we have to think about this and how the future will imply a new recombination of capitalism and democracy under these considerations. Thank you very much. Stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Aldo. This is the part in which we are done with the talks, and I would like to try to have a conversation as if we were in the same room. So maybe because we have enough time, I will invite people from the audience to, if they have any questions, thank you, Paul, to raise their hands digitally, and then I can call on you. And if you could turn your video on, if you may, if you are willing, and then introduce yourself and ask the questions, that would be great. I will try to collect a few if there are any. Then I will ask the participants, the panelists, to maybe ask each other questions, and I will try to contribute to the conversation as well. So Paul, do you want to begin?
Sure, thank you. So it's a comment or contribution to the discussion rather than a question. Is that all right at this point?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So I've worked a lot on global inequality. So my name is Paul Segal. I'm an economist at King's College London. I work on inequality and development. And just wanted to respond to Aldo's comment about global inequality. So it's not the case that global inequality has continued to rise in recent years. So all the evidence is pretty clear now that since around 2005, there's been a significant decline in global inequality. So that's driven, so I mean, I have estimates on that that are based on household surveys and the new top incomes data. Branko Milanovic's latest estimates show the same, and Piketty's team also show the same, inequality kind of globally declining since around 2005. And that's driven both by, well, largely by the between country component, which is of course to do with China growing very fast while the rich world stagnates. And that's continued to be the case. But also, which is kind of more novel and less well understood, is that there's been a significant decline in inequality within many countries as well since that period. So as Aldo knows, I'm sure, inequality declined in a lot of Latin American countries since about 2000. But also, what is slightly less well known is that inequality even declined a little bit in China since about 2005, 2006-ish. So those are trends that I think we need to work more on. I think they need to be recognized. And just one final kind of normative point about that is that even if it's true that inequality seems to be declining in a lot of places, of course, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about it. It doesn't mean we should be complacent. It doesn't mean that it's not still way too high. But I think that even those of us who really want inequality to decline much faster, we just need to make sure that we get the underlying facts straight first. Thank you.
Aldo, do you want to respond? Well, not, you're muted, Aldo.
Maybe let's collect. I will think about that.
Okay. Anyone else in the audience has a question, or I can jump in, or the panelists can jump in. Do you have questions for each other? I will take my turn then. I have a question to begin the conversation to Zophia and then to Keun. Zophia, you were talking about the role of what you call racial capitalism, and you really emphasized what it does in the global north, that is the receiving countries. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more how you think about racialized or racial capitalism in the global south in regard particularly to the sending countries, especially because you started the talk by talking about the migrant, right? And so I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit analytically, what's the right way to approach it in regard to development in the global south? In regard to Keun, I have two questions for you. I'm really interested in the question of innovation, and I have a question about measuring. First, you rely to talk about the catching up. You talked about it in terms of expenditure on R&D and in terms of patents. And I was wondering how confident can we be that investment in R&D and even patents actually translate into economic growth and greater employment and issues like that, that is the conventional measures of measuring catching up. And the other question that I have is about the domestic value chains and whether or not it gives an advantage to large countries, size-wise, rather than small economies in which the domestic value chain, the domestic value chain might be a bit more challenging. And Simone has a question. So let's collect another one and then we can maybe address it. And Gabo has a, wait, so now, hold on. So let's Simone and then Gabo has a question and then Aldo?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'll be super brief. Actually, I have a very similar question for Zophia to the one that Nitsan just asked. Maybe I will put it in a slightly older terminology. The semi-periphery in world system theory, especially the Wallsteinian world system theory, is really important. And I'm just kind of wondering how your framework of racial capitalism will speak to what happens in countries that in a world system theoretical perspective do actually have a lot of potential for kind of a shaking up of world system dynamics. And then I have another small question for my colleague Ying Yao. I'm very curious to hear about whether you thought about typology of actors that may be mobilized in these processes of coordination. I mean, I think the state is very important in your framework, but I'm wondering if you've thought about civil society, labor unions. What kinds of actors do we need to look for if you want to understand this kind of new process of coordination? Thank you.
So let's let Aldo and then Zophia and then Keun and then Ying Yao answer and then collect your questions.
Okay, I will go then directly to Paul's remarks. Look, I mean, you're the expert on inequality, so I'm trusting you that what you say is right. I'm just gonna say that the decline in inequality in Latin America stopped around 2013, 2014, and then it's going up again. So that's so far for Latin America. And for the rest of the world, I'm trusting the very guys that you're citing here, the Piketty, SASE, and Zuckman report, 2018 report, where they do say that the elephant graph turned into they use this metaphor, the Loch Ness monster. So that means that actually it is the top 5 and 1%, which is growing much faster than all the rest. So I'm not sure how this relates to what you're saying, but those are the facts until recent data 2018. So not sure whether it's about income versus wealth, or maybe you know more about this.
Keun, you're muted.
Okay. So first question, two questions by Nitsan. First, about the issue of the measurement using R&D or patent and how it's linked to the growth and so on. Of course, this is the most critical question. In other words, even if you have a good patent numbers or R&D, that doesn't necessarily mean you have a better outcome. So that's exactly the concept of innovation system. In other words, how you translate those key variables into actual growth benefit. That's what innovation system concept trying to capture. So if you have a good NIS or if you have bad NIS, you don't have a good translation from these key indicators to actual benefit. So that's why we emphasize you should have good NIS, which means how to utilize knowledge into actual commercialization. So those are the concept NIS trying to, a system trying to capture, okay? And another point is that even if you have many patents, you should have a certain strategy of where to file patent first. That's why I'm talking about short cycle versus long cycle. Brazil, Argentina has many patents in long cycle, which is very basic sciences, but they don't turn that into actual commercial usages because long cycle is very difficult to enter its actual businesses. There are so many incumbent entry barriers. So you only end up filing patent, writing articles, getting some recognition in academic community, but no actual commercial activities are possible. So that's what I'm saying. You should have some strategy of where to use specialize, where to put resources into certain which field, which sectors. Those are important consideration from humanitarian economists. Okay. Then this how to increase domestic value chain out of learning from global value chain. Of course, there might be some advantage of bigness like China or Brazil, but usually it is a small country. They have to have a more need to integrate into global value chain because there are not much available domestic territories. So small country has more reason to join global value chain, but that's fine. But so you need to have a join value chain globally to learn from outside. That's necessary. But my point is that usually you rely on a lot of imported intermediate good, intermediate high-tech part. But essential thing is to how to localize those things into local production. That's the difficult part. Otherwise, even if you export, you keep importing more high added intermediate part, then you keep having trade deficit. So in that regard, small country like Korea or some country has experience in localizing those formerly imported part and moving a value chain. So I'm not saying it's not impossible for small country to develop local value chain, but of course there might be advantage of bigness with some bigger domestic market. And the example is China, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Zophia?
Thank you for those questions. So I guess I'll answer both of them together because they're so related about the development in the global south, both the periphery and the semi-periphery. So basically this concept of racial capitalism is just forcing us to recognize both the racial and colonial logics of how capitalism works, right? That this isn't race neutral, these processes are not race neutral, and they are definitely a legacy of the way in which capitalism was birthed in the first place through colonial exploitation and racism. And so in terms of what this is doing then to countries that we would call in the periphery right now, for example, well, I started with Jamaica. We can see that, okay, Jamaica actually did really well in containing COVID. So they've really minimized the number of deaths and the number of cases. They had their government response was quick, comprehensive, and they've only had, since the onset of the crisis, 10 COVID-related deaths and just over 150 cases. And so it has comparatively done really well. However, the question becomes, what's gonna happen in a country that the logic, right, the logics have depended upon extreme interdependence with the external markets due to its colonial history, right? And so this dependency, and this ties in with the Wallersteinian dependency. And I would add Walter Rodney, who, you know, talked about exploitation in Africa, right? That these logics continue. And so no matter how well Jamaica does, no matter how well Caribbean countries do in terms of containing COVID, is it sustainable once they reopen their markets? They depend so much on tourism, they depend so much on remittances, which is why, again, you see these Black populations being forced to leave the relative safety of their own countries in terms of their health to go into this, you know, to very, very precarious situations now because of these logics. So in terms of the semi-periphery and these countries that have been experiencing growth, what we call growth and development, again, it's like, what is the underlying basis of that? If we look at the other example I brought of Brazil, this is based on the dispossession from indigenous people, right? In terms of land and resources, again, the super exploitation of the predominantly Black population. So it's a sort of basically just forcing us to really grapple with these racial colonial logics that continue and persist into the present day, so that we can have sort of a more comprehensive understanding of what is capital accumulation and what is it based on, and then who does it end up impacting the most.
Thank you. Gabo, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. So I have a question to, sorry?
Can you introduce yourself first?
Yes, so my name is Gabor. I'm Gabor Schering. I am a research fellow at Bocconi University in Milan. And one of my main research areas is the political economy of the developmental models in Eastern Europe and how they contributed to the rise of neoliberal populism. And your argument about the difficulties in switching from a model that relies heavily on global value chains, but might lead to a middle income trap, resonates so much with what I find in Eastern Europe, in countries like, especially like Slovakia and Hungary. So these countries imported a lot of foreign investment, which helped improving their industries. These countries both export a lot of automotive components, but the problem is that they are importing most of the technology. So what they are doing is basically assembling these components locally and exporting back to countries like Germany. So these activities by multinational companies don't really have much of an effect on the local economy. So this creates a massive economic dualism, which does not allow the benefits from global value chains to spread out in the local economy. And then the big question is how you sort of, I don't know if decoupling is the right word, but how do you decrease in the embeddedness of global value chains without causing sort of a local economic crisis, but also doing that to allow more domestic value added? What would be the tools, the policy tools, or the social programs or the industrial policy programs that would allow countries today to do that, you know, considering the constraints that are embedded in contemporary global international financial institutions? So what would be the policy tools to improve local or domestic value added?
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Can I respond to this one, or can I wait? Or?
Let's collect a few more. So Paul, I think you have your hand raised. Yes.
Yes, thank you. It's a question to Zophia on this idea of racialized capitalism, which I find very interesting and extremely plausible. I have a question. So we know that within, say, the US power elite, there's been a significant increase in diversity over the last 50 years or so, both in terms of sexuality, gender, but also in terms of race. So would you see that as just kind of like a fig leaf, like a shallow legitimation strategy, allowing just a few Black people into the power elite, based on on a disingenuous discourse of meritocracy? Or would you say something else about it? So how would you think about that phenomenon?
Anyone else from the audience with questions? If so, please raise your virtual hand because I don't see all of you. Okay.
Virtual hand.
Do you have a question to someone else?
I have a question. Yeah, I have a question for Hinyo.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering about the prerequisites for coordination. So how because I feel this is really crucial. Coordination is a very important topic, both politically and socially and economically, as you say, but trust and power sharing, and I'm thinking here about Cathy Thielen's work and Wolfgang Streeck's, of course, is, in Europe has been a long process of intermingling of institutions, actors, and it's not that somebody came about and produced this trust or induced it. So how do you think this can be done in countries like East Asians or Latin Americas that lack this type of trust and power sharing agreements that go so far back in European countries?
So who wants to answer first?
Maybe I can, yeah.
Sure.
So let me try to respond to the important question raised by Gabo about how to create local value added out of your initial dependence on GVC, maybe based from Korean experiences. I guess two main factors should be industrial policy and firm level determination to replace the foreign value added by domestic value added. For example, Hyundai Motors, at the beginning, they used to use all the Japanese-made engine and German-made transmission. So it's fundamental decision to localize this engine and transmission. And Hyundai Motor talked to BMW, Ford, all they said, no, you don't have to localize engine. I'll be supplying my engine to you. You don't have to bother to localize engine. So Hyundai determined their own plan to localize engine, and they talked to UK-based company called Ricardo. This is automobile technology company who does job of designing and producing engines. So Hyundai joined a contract with the Ricardo company to produce their own engines. It took 7 years. 7 years. So such long investment is very needed, but it's still risk-taking. Okay. At the same time, Hyundai used to import a lot of intermediate parts, but those are all made by Japanese companies. But they're a local company, but they are poor quality, so Hyundai have to import abroad. But so this is kind of the state. But there was government intervention to boost up local production by giving incentives, a lot of boost in terms of technical help and banking subsidy. Otherwise, local company cannot replace imported part from abroad or Japan. So without intervention by government, without fundamental determination, it's an easy decouple, try decouple value chain. Yeah. We need to have some decisive movement and decisive plan to change situation. Yeah. Market alone doesn't help in this regard.
Zophia?
Yes. So this is a really good question about the power elite right now and the increasing diversity within the power elite in the US. I don't know, in Europe as well. I don't know. But in terms of this, I think what we're seeing is that this is largely tokenistic and symbolic. out of the 615 billionaires, for example, in the US, only 6 of them are Black. And so that's an extremely small percentage, considering that Black people have been working in this country for hundreds of years. And so I think that that's definitely not significant at this point to call it a shift in what the power elite looks like in terms of like who controls sort of the political economy. And also in terms of the political elite, people would also point to Barack Obama's election, for example, as sort of, you know, ushering a different era, a post-racial era. But I think the analysts have kind of really demonstrated that this was indeed largely symbolic of Barack Obama was not able to fundamentally change racial capitalism in any way. I mean, we can think Black Lives Matter as a movement emerged while Barack Obama was president. And so I think seeing these faces, we would have to really examine what ideologies and policies those faces push or represent, right? So if it is still fundamentally based on racial neoliberal capitalism, then I think the logic is the same.
Aldo, do you want to add?
Oh, it's fine. I don't have more questions. I'm very interested in following up with Yao on this cooperation issue.
I have some comment.
Yes, please.
On the issue raised by Aldo, which is democracy. You know, we are now, there was a book by Roderick in Harvard. He wrote the book Globalization Paradox or Globalization Trilemma, which said that globalization, democracy, national sovereignty cannot go together. So you cannot have all 3 things together. But now after this Trump and the coronavirus, globalization is now kind of stopped. That gives us a new opportunity. Try seek more national sovereignty and democracy, because we are not getting free from globalization kind of trend. So in this sense, we are facing new period of opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. So this is the point in which I'm supposed to thank the speakers and thank the audience, and we're all supposed to get up and introduce each other and, you know, get to know each other better. But we can't do that. And still I'm going to declare this panel really successful. Thank you so much for really 4 fascinating talks, which I think really did complement each other from different theoretical perspectives and orientations. And so thank you for doing this. And I hope that you continue enjoying this virtual conference for the next 4 days. I appreciate the clappings and the thumbs up. This is great. So thank you. I hope to see your faces again in the next few days, and be well and good luck to all of us. Bye.